I put this incredibly cheap BFS reel through a series of tough challenges to discover whether it's a piece of garbage that will leave you tearful and asking for a refund, or whether it's a purple and silver diamond in the rough. Speaking of purple, this thing is very purple. They've absolutely embraced that colour and applied it with some gusto on this particular reel, it's fair to say. And because gear choice of all kinds is such a personal preference, I've had to cover 4 main topic areas. Depending on the results of those challenges could completely explode your idea of how much money you need to pay in order to have a great BFS experience. First of all, what everyone needs to know is the basic specifications of what the thing's set up to do. Then there's the overall build quality of the reel, the feel of it in use and the overall impression that you get when you're actually handling it. And of course the aesthetic, so I've lumped that all under the umbrella of the experience of the reel. Then there's the overall casting performance. And finally, the killer category, which decides whether a reel will sink or swim. And that's how it performs when you're actually fishing with it out on the water. Now, before I reveal some of the surprises that I came across during these tests, I thought I'd at least go through just the basic first impressions to give you a feel for this thing. As you'd expect at the price point, it does feel a little bit plasticky. It is very light as a result, but some of the bits of the finish are a little bit rough, and it certainly feels a little bit more geary in use compared to, you know, like a top-end JDM reel. The manufacturers can't work magic, and they have to find practical ways of shaving those costs down so they can offer it at such a bargain price to the market. So no, it doesn't feel like a JDM reel that costs $600, but nor should you expect it to. Let's have a look at some of the things it does do and the feel that you get from it when you strap it on a rod and start fishing with it. First of all, you've got quite a nice clicking drag star, becoming a standard feature for most reels these days. Again, it's quite a nice subtle clicker on the spool tension adjustment, and that works, you know, very well. It feels robust, it feels accurate. The other thing that comes as standard, which actually doesn't necessarily come as standard for some of those more expensive Japanese reels, is a drag clicker when it pays out line. And it's pretty audible, as you can tell. Now, in fact, it's kind of so robust as a noise that it does kind of shake the reel a little bit. All that means is that it actually performs the function that it's supposed to, in as much as if you're winding against a fish that's trying to peel drag, you can at least tell when the reel is paying out line. That becomes important when using low breaking strain lines, which is very common, obviously, using BFS style fishing. Moving on to the casting brake adjustment, this is actually very easy to operate, and it has again another accurate clicker for each division, and it's way smoother, for example, than the infamous GH100, which would practically break your thumbnail off every time you tried to move it 1 notch to the left or right. So that's actually quite a neat function. It works very well. The brakes themselves, they go from a true 0 setting with a really good spin time, even straight out of the box, as you can see on this close-up. And actually, after removing the bearings, cleaning them up in acetone, and then adding just the tiniest micro droplet of Juthlon cast lube, that spin time increases again. And with that, you can see the first clues as to where CastFanatic have actually spent their money on this reel. As the name implies, it's focused very much on casting performance. With that said, I do have to remind myself exactly how cheap this reel is. I mean, a quick spin test on the handle, and you can see that it runs reasonably smoothly with a quick bat around like that. You know, that's not too shabby at all. I can just compare that with the Solar King Acura here. And yes, okay, there's a marked improvement. And again, that's another budget reel, albeit, you know, a fair amount more expensive than the CastFanatic. But you can see the benefit of the extra bearings in the Acura. And that's really, you know, where you'd get the benefit from maybe investing in that reel. It's a little bit smaller in the hand as well compared to the CastFanatic. But like I say, not too shabby at all. In fact, really quite pleasant, again keeping in mind that price factor. Moving on to some more of the cosmetic and the touchy-feely factors, if you will. The thumb bar itself, there's a tiny bit of side-to-side play, left to right. However, there's no slop in terms of when you depress it to actually disengage and also re-engage in the spool. That's nice and positive. And I've had this out on stream, as you'll see in the upcoming parts of the video, for a good few sessions now, and that seems to be holding up pretty well. Very happy with that aspect of the reel. Moving on to the brakes, these are magnetic and in the MagTrack style. So they're adjustable, but they don't have the dynamically moving brake shoes or inductor. However, because of the way magnetic braking actually works, there is always an element of dynamic braking, because the faster the spool spins, the stronger the braking force. I've already mentioned that the braking system goes down to a true 0 setting, and that's in contrast to some of the other affordable reels on the market, such as the Valiant Eagle in its current iteration, which seems to be a bit over-braked, particularly at the low end. However, don't take that to mean that the CastFanatic B1 doesn't have a very firm braking at the higher settings, because it absolutely does, and we'll see that in some of the cast testing that's coming up in the video. And we're moving on to the real hidden gem in this particular reel. That is the spool. It is incredibly light for a stock spool, but it seems also to be pretty robust as well. Interestingly, in the design of that spool, they've gone for quite a thin, narrow band on the braking inductor surface. And I think the only reason they can get away with this is because the inertia of the spool is so low because of that low weight. So they seem to have got that trade-off between the mass of the spool and the strength of the brakes. And I've certainly seen this, for example, with Roro spool, when they've come out with much, much lighter versions. They no longer, in my opinion, need to have the thicker inductor that they'd offered on some of their kind of 5 gram plus spools. With Roro's 3 point whatever gram spools, that thin inductor is absolutely fine. These physics also seem to apply on that narrow inductor band that you'll find on the CastFanatic spool. For a full rundown of those specs and details, please check out the blog post, which, if you're not watching the video embedded in that blog post, I'll put the link in the description underneath the YouTube video so you can go straight to it. That written format's much more suitable to the very detailed listing out of those stats and specs. You can look them up, for example, if you want to upgrade the bearings and find out some of the stuff that, you know, is really much more technical in nature. In this video, I'll just give a brief overview of the most important things. So, for instance, the spool itself weighing in at, without the bearing, at 5.06 grams, if my memory serves correctly. That's incredible for a stock spool. The manufacturers list it as something like 6.3 grams. I'm assuming that's weighed with the bearing, but even then on my scales it was coming up at 6.2 something. The spool, I think, is, in combination with the braking system and some pretty decent bearings as stock, that's the key to this reel and what lets it do some really, really surprising things at this price point. In terms of some other manufacturing details, we've got a graphite crank handle, and when I kind of tug and pull and push on it, there's a little bit of play between the handle and the body, but it's actually nothing terrible, nothing to write home about. Similarly, with the anti-reverse, that engages instantaneously. Here are the first results. The CastFanatic in its out-of-the-box state threw a respectable 12.7 metres, but that's about 4'7" short of the upgraded Acura. Day 2 tested the effects of cleaned and cast lube bearings. Now for the final results. We saw what happened out of the box. Could the Duathlon close the gap? A decent headwind challenged both reels, yet the differences shrunk to almost exactly 1 foot. Cleaning and lubing the factory bearings made the gap over 4.5 times smaller. Wow, nice fish. Well, that spot there was by the tree roots. I suspect one, right? There we go, long distance release. Chasing. There we go. Over the branches. Ski. Make sure to come along on more BFS adventures on this next video linked on screen here. Also check out my VIP email newsletter on the link in the description and also in the article on the blog.